Okay, so let's dive in here. We're talking about a guy with like 8,700 employees worldwide.
Wow.
Yeah, and over 500 stores, and not just like clothing stores either.
Right.
I mean, furniture restaurants, bars, hotels, even like a whole line of suites.
Really?
Yeah, and all of that brings in over 2 billion euros every year.
That's a lot of euros.
Yeah, and in 2022, that actually made him the second richest person in Italy.
Wow, that's impressive.
It is. And here's the thing, he originally wanted to be a surgeon.
Really? That's a pretty big change of plans.
It's a huge change of plans right
Yeah, like
there.
going from surgery to fashion. What a left turn.
It really makes you wonder what could make someone change their mind like that.
Absolutely. Like someone with the drive to go through med school and then to build this fashion empire.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to unpack today, the story of Giorgio Armani.
One of the biggest names in fashion.
Yeah, he completely changed the fashion world, not just in Italy, but globally.
Definitely.
So we're going to look at the key moments in his life, the decisions that led to his success.
That's a great way to understand his impact.
It really is. Think of this deep dive as your shortcut to understanding Armani.
Like a cheat sheet to fashion history.
Exactly. And the source for all this is a YouTube video transcript from Starting Finance called Orologio, the Vera Storia di Armani.
Okay, so we're getting the inside scoop.
Straight from the source. So for you, our listener, we're going to break down the most important parts of Armani's life and career and figure out what made him so successful, both as a designer and a businessman.
Sounds good. Let's get started.
All right, so let's start at the beginning.
Okay, so Armani's early life seems pretty normal, actually.
Normal? How so?
Well, he was born in Piacenza in 1934.
Okay.
His dad worked in administration, and his mom came from a family of furniture merchants.
So a pretty typical Italian family.
Yeah, pretty much. He had an older brother, Sergio, and a younger sister, Rosanna.
Okay.
But even as a kid, he was really interested in aesthetics and art.
So that creative spark was there from the beginning.
Yeah, it seems like it.
But like a lot of parents back then wanted him to have a more stable career.
Of course, who wouldn't want their kid to be set up for life?
Exactly. So after he finished scientific high school in 1953, he went to medical school at the State University of Milan.
To become a surgeon.
A surgeon. That's pretty serious stuff.
Yeah, and, back then in post-war, Italy, being a doctor was a big deal.
Like a status symbol.
Exactly. It meant you were successful and secure.
So it sounds like maybe Armani wasn't super passionate about medicine.
It does seem like he might have been following his parents' wishes more than his own dreams.
And that's where things take an interesting turn.
Oh, how so?
Well, after 3 years of med school, he got drafted for mandatory military service.
Ah, so that interrupted his studies.
It did, and it actually gave him a chance to really think about what he wanted to do with his life.
It's interesting. Sometimes these unexpected events can really change your path.
They really can. So while he was stationed in Milan, he decided to ditch medicine.
Just like that.
Yeah, he knew it wasn't for him, but he didn't have another career in mind yet.
Wow. So he was starting over with no clear plan.
It was a bold move.
No.
So after his military service, he was basically back to square one.
That must have been tough, feeling like you're behind everyone else.
Yeah, but he didn't let that stop him in 1957 at 23 years old. He got a job at La Rinascente in Milan.
La Rinascente.
Yeah, it's a department store.
Okay, so he went into retail.
But it wasn't about designing clothes at first. He was helping the architects with the store layout and get this window dressing.
Window dressing. That's interesting.
Yeah, and La Rinascente in the 60s wasn't just any department store.
What do you mean?
Well, it was like a creative hub. Designers, architects, marketing people, advertising experts all came together there.
Sounds like a pretty exciting place to be.
It was, and that environment definitely influenced him.
So even though he wasn't designing clothes yet, he was learning a lot about the fashion world.
Exactly. He was getting this firsthand experience of what people were drawn to, what they wanted to buy.
By setting up the window displays?
Right. He was basically on the front lines of observing consumer trends.
That's a pretty valuable skill.
And his bosses saw that.
They did.
Yeah, they were so impressed with his understanding of what customers wanted that they asked him to start identifying the best-selling men's clothing items.
So he could help them make better production decisions.
Exactly. He was like an early version of a modern buyer,
Oh.
Predicting trends and understanding what the market needed.
That's amazing. He basically taught himself how the whole fashion industry worked.
He really did. He spent about 7 years at La Rinascente soaking it all up.
That's a pretty solid foundation.
Yeah, it really was. And his talent caught the eye of a guy named Nino Cerruti.
Nino Cerruti.
Yeah, he was a businessman from Biella who had started his own menswear company in Milan called Hitman Cerruti.
Oh, okay, so another big name in fashion.
Exactly. And Cerruti saw something special in Armani. He recognized his ability to understand what people wanted to wear.
So he basically poached him from La Rinascente.
Kind of in 1965, Cerruti hired Armani as a stylist to design his clothing collections.
So this was Armani's first real chance to design clothes.
It was, and it was huge for him. He finally got to see his ideas come to life.
That must have been incredibly rewarding.
I bet it was. And these years working with Cerruti were crucial for him. He really developed his own style. Elegant, rigorous, often androgynous, but always practical and comfortable.
That's a really unique combination.
It is, and it became his signature.
I can definitely see that in his design.
And during this time, he came up with a really innovative idea. He redesigned the men's jacket.
How so?
He made it less formal, gave it softer shoulders, and less rigid internal structures.
So he kind of deconstructed the traditional suit.
Exactly. And it was a hit. People loved it. It fit perfectly with the changing times. You know, people wanted to look sharp, but also feel relaxed.
It was like he understood exactly what people needed before they even knew it themselves.
And he didn't just stop at menswear. He applied the same ideas to women's clothing, too.
So he was really thinking about a whole new way of dressing.
Absolutely. And right around this time, he met another really important person, Sergio Gagliotti.
Sergio Gagliotti, who was he?
Well, he was originally an architect, but he moved into advertising and then became a buyer for the LaRousse menswear chain.
Okay, so he knew the fashion industry inside and out.
Yeah, he did. They met in 1966 while they were both on vacation in Forte dei Marmi.
So it was fate.
Maybe Gagliotti saw Armani's talent right away and told him he should start his own line.
That's a pretty bold suggestion.
It was, but Armani took it seriously. It took a few years, though, for them to actually make it happen.
So what did they do?
In 1973, they opened a design consultancy office in Corso Venezia in Milan.
Okay, so instead of launching their own brand right away, they decided to offer their design services to other companies.
Yeah, exactly. They were working with companies like Sikans Baguda Tundrese Corland.
That's a pretty smart move.
It was strategic. They were building their reputation, making connections, and learning how the whole production process worked.
So they were playing the long game.
Exactly, and this was all happening while Italian pret-a-porter was taking off.
Pret-a-porter, what's that?
It means ready-to-wear. It is a move away from the super expensive custom-made clothes of haute couture.
So it was about making high fashion more accessible.
Exactly, and Armani was one of the first designers to really embrace this idea of collaborating with companies that were used to producing clothes on a larger scale.
It was a really smart move.
He was at the forefront of this new wave in fashion.
And I bet it helped him get his name out there.
Absolutely. The collections he designed for these companies were shown at Palazzo Pitti in Florence.
That's a big deal, right?
Huge. It's one of the most important events for the Italian fashion industry.
So he was getting recognition for the people who mattered.
Exactly. And with all that experience and recognition under their belts, they were finally ready to launch their own company.
So they took the plunge.
They did. In 1975, they founded Giorgio Armani SPA in Milan.
What a moment.
It was. But starting a company takes money.
Of course, where did they get the capital?
Well, Gagliotti convinced Armani to sell his Volkswagen Beetle.
Wow, that's dedicated.
It is. And they scraped together about 10 million lire, which is like 50,000 euros today.
Not a huge amount to start a fashion empire.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
They split the ownership 50-50.
So they were true partners in every sense.
They really were. And at first, they didn't actually have their own production facilities.
Really?
Yeah. They stuck to their consultancy model, focusing on the creative side and outsourcing the production.
Okay, so they were still keeping it lean.
Yeah, though their team was tiny.
Yeah.
Just them, an administrator, a general assistant, and a secretary.
Wow. Everyone wearing multiple hats?
They had to, but they were efficient. They launched their first menswear collection in 1975 and then added women's wear the next year.
So they were moving quickly.
They were, and people loved their clothes. Their first year in business, they made 569 million lire.
Which is like 2.5 million euros today.
Yeah, not bad for a brand new company.
Not bad at all.
But the move that really changed everything came in 1978.
Wow.
They signed a deal with Gruppo Finanziario Teseo, or GFT.
GFT, what's that?
They were a big textile company, and they became the main producer of Armani's lines.
Okay.
But here's the really important part. This agreement gave Armani control over the production process.
even though GFT was actually making the clothes?
Exactly. He could go into their factories and make sure everything was being done to his standards.
That's a pretty big deal.
It was huge. It meant that for the first time, high fashion designs were being mass-produced in factories.
That's a game changer.
It was, and it was perfect timing because Italy's economy was booming in the 70s.
So people had more money to spend on clothes.
Exactly, and there was this new middle class that was really interested in fashion and looking good.
So the market was ripe for a brand like Armani.
Exactly, and it wasn't just Armani. A whole bunch of Italian designers were exploding onto the scene.
Like who?
Versace, Albini, Valentino, they were all creating this new Italian style.
And made in Italy became a sign of quality.
It did, and Milan became a fashion capital right up there with Paris.
I could see why Italian fashion was having a moment.
And it wasn't just about the clothes. Italian fashion was everywhere in movies, on TV. It was influencing the whole world.
So Armani was part of this cultural phenomena.
He was a big part of it. He dressed celebrities like Catherine Deneuve and Tom Cruise.
So he was really shaping the way people saw Italian fashion.
He was, and he and Gagliotti had a clear strategy. They wanted to create a brand that was luxurious but also accessible.
Accessible luxury.
Yeah, they wanted to appeal to this new middle class with clothes that were high quality and stylish but not outrageously expensive.
So they were kind of democratizing high fashion.
Exactly, and they were working incredibly hard, sacrificing a lot to make it happen.
Sounds like it.
And their hard work paid off in 1979. Armani won the Neiman Marcus Award in New York.
That's a big award.
It's a huge honor in the fashion world, and it really put Armani on the map internationally.
And then things just kept getting bigger.
They did. In 1982, he was on the cover of Time magazine.
Wow, that's huge.
It was, and it made him a household name.
And his sales tripled that year.
They did. People were going crazy for Armani.
So by then, they were a global phenomenon.
Pretty much. And they knew they needed more control over their production, especially for their high-end Pret-a-Porter line.
Right.
So in 1983, they changed their agreement with GFT.
How so?
They leased and renovated this beautiful old palace in Milan, the Palazzo Marinati.
Wow, that sounds fancy.
It became their own atelier and show space.
So they were really stepping up their game.
By 1984, their annual turnover was 50 billion lire, almost 70 million euros today.
That's incredible growth.
And through it all, Armani and Gagliotti's relationship went beyond just business partners.
They were close friends.
More than that, they were actually a couple.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, they kept it very private, but they were deeply in love.
That makes their story even more powerful.
It does. But sadly, their happiness was cut short in the summer of 1985. Sergio Gagliotti died suddenly.
Oh no, what happened?
He had a heart attack. It turned out he had acute leukemia.
That's so sad. He's only 40 years old.
It was a huge loss for Armani, both personally and professionally.
I can't even imagine what he went through.
It was devastating, but he managed to find the strength to carry on.
What did he do?
He bought out Gagliotti's shares in the company.
So he took full control.
He was determined to honor Gagliotti's memory and build the brand they had created together.
That's incredibly inspiring.
It is, and he had a clear vision for how to do it.
What was his plan?
He focused on 4 key things: accessibility, diversification, licensing, and international expansion.
Those are some pretty solid pillars for growth.
They are. So first, accessibility. He knew that his clothes needed to be luxurious, but not out of reach for most people.
So he kept his prices relatively affordable.
Exactly. He wanted to appeal to a wider audience than just the super rich.
That makes sense.
And then diversification, he didn't want to just be a one-trick pony. He expanded beyond the main Giorgio Armani line.
So he created different brands for different types of customers.
Right. In 1981, he launched Emporio Armani, which was more youthful and less expensive.
I love Emporio Armani.
Then came Armani Jeans, Armani Exchange, Armani Collezioni, the Haute Couture line, Armani Privé, even Armani Junior for kids.
Wow, he was really covering all the bases.
He was. And then licensing, he was smart. He didn't try to do everything himself. He partnered with other companies to produce things like fragrances, cosmetics, furniture, eyewear, all under the Armani brand.
So he was leveraging his brand recognition to expand into new markets.
Exactly, and it was incredibly successful. Think about Armani perfumes, they're iconic.
They are. I actually wear Acqua di Gio myself.
And finally, international expansion. He knew he had to go global.
So he opened stores all over the world.
Exactly. In 1987, he formed a joint venture to create Giorgio Armani Japan.
Japan is a huge market for luxury goods.
It is. And by the late 90s, the Armani Group had a presence in 33 countries.
That's impressive.
It is. And he didn't just open stores, he also invested in and acquired manufacturing companies.
Like which ones?
companies like Antonia Sain and Intai.
Why did he do that?
He wanted to have more control over the quality of his products and how they were distributed.
So he was really building a vertically integrated empire.
Exactly. And it all paid off. Within 25 years, he had built this global fashion powerhouse that was synonymous with made in Italy.
That's remarkable. And he did it all without ever going public.
Yeah, he never wanted to give up control of his company.
So he's the ultimate independent designer.
Exactly. And he's fiercely proud of that.
I can see why.
And his success just kept rolling into the new millennium.
How so?
Well, in 2000, they celebrated their 25th anniversary, and their revenue was over 1.3 billion euros, with a profit of 160 million.
Those are some serious numbers.
They are, and they continue to expand and diversify.
What else did they get into?
Well, in 2000, they launched Armani Casa, their home furnishings and interior design line.
So now you can have Armani in your living room.
Exactly. And then in 2002, they started Armani Dolci, their line of sweets.
Armani chocolates.
Exactly. And they moved into the hospitality industry, too.
Really?
Yeah, they opened cafes, clubs, restaurants, and hotels, all under the Armani brand.
Like the Armani Hotel in Dubai.
That's the one. It's in the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world.
So they're really going for that ultra-luxury experience.
They are, and they partnered with the famous chef Nobu Matsuhisa to create Armani Nobu restaurants.
That's a pretty high-profile collaboration.
It is, and they kept investing in their manufacturing capabilities. They acquired Diana SPA, which makes high-quality knitwear,
Okay.
and Gardi SPA, which makes shoes.
So they were really becoming a self-sufficient fashion powerhouse.
Exactly. And in a move that surprised some people, Armani bought a majority stake in the Olimpia Milano basketball team in 2008.
Really? I didn't know he was into basketball.
He's a big sports fan, and then in 2015, he opened Armani Silos.
What's that?
It's an exhibition and event space in Milan where he showcases the history and creativity of the brand.
Sounds like a museum dedicated to Armani.
It kind of is, and it really solidified his legacy.
But eventually, the question of who would take over the company had to come up.
It did. Armani was getting older, and he didn't have any children.
So what did he do?
In 2016, he established the Giorgio Armani Foundation.
A foundation? What for?
Officially, it's for public and social benefit projects.
Okay, that sounds good.
But the real reason everyone knows is that it's for succession planning.
So he's setting things up for the future of the company.
Exactly. He wants to make sure that his vision continues even after he's gone.
That's smart, especially with such a diverse portfolio of businesses.
And he's still innovating. In 2021, he partnered with the Italian Sea Group to create an Armani-branded mega yacht.
A mega yacht, wow.
Yeah, he's not slowing down.
But he's 89 years old now. The question of succession is becoming more and more pressing.
It is, and it's interesting because his approach is very different from some other designers like Valentino Garavani.
What did Valentino do?
He retired a while back, handed over the creative reins to someone else, and eventually sold his company to a Qatari investment fund.
So Armani is taking a different path.
He's still very much at the helm, and he hasn't publicly named a successor or said anything about selling the company.
So he's keeping his cards close to his chest.
He is now the Giorgio Armani Foundation owns a tiny percentage of the company's shares, like 0.01%.
Okay.
But Armani himself owns the rest, 99.99%.
Wow, so he's still the ultimate decision maker.
He is, and a few years ago, he set up this thing called a deferred effectiveness statute in the company's rules.
What's that?
It's basically a succession plan, but it only kicks in when certain things happen, like if he dies.
Okay, so he's got it all figured out.
It seems like it, but for years, nobody knew exactly what was in this statute. It was a secret.
So it was a big mystery.
Then in 2021, he gave an interview to Vogue Business America and said something really surprising.
What did he say?
He said that he might be open to an agreement with a big Italian company and not necessarily a fashion company.
Wow, that's unexpected.
It was, and it sent the rumor mill into overdrive.
So everyone's trying to figure out who he might be talking to.
Exactly. The name that kept coming up was John Elkann.
John Elkann, why him?
Well, he runs Exor, which is the Agnelli family holding company. They've got their fingers in all sorts of pies, including Ferrari.
So people thought Armani might be partnering with Ferrari?
Yeah, there were even rumors of a whole dossier being prepared, but nothing ever came of it.
So it was just speculation.
It seems like it, but then a few months later at Milan Fashion Week, Armani made a public appearance with Pantaleo Dell'Orco.
Pantaleo Dell'Orco, who's that?
Everyone calls him Leo. He's been working with Armani for over 40 years.
Wow, long time.
And he's on the company's board of directors.
So people started thinking maybe he's the chosen successor.
Exactly, especially since Armani's nieces and nephews are also on the board.
His nieces and nephews.
Yeah, Silvana and Roberta, who are his brother's daughters, and Andrea Camerana, who's his sister's son.
So it's a family affair.
It is, but Armani still hasn't said anything definite about who will take over.
He's keeping us all guessing.
He is, but just recently, in September, he held a big meeting with the company's shareholders.
What was that about?
It was to change that deferred effectiveness statute that he set up.
So he's finally revealing his succession plan.
Well, sort of the details were leaked to the Italian newspaper Corriere della Sera.
And what did they say?
The big news is that he's creating 2 new types of shares that don't have any voting rights.
So people can invest in the company, but they won't have any say in how it's run.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
these non-voting shares can't make up more than half of the company's total shares.
So he's still maintaining control.
He is, but it also means that he's open to outside investment.
Maybe he needs more capital to keep growing the company.
Possibly, or maybe he's just being strategic.
And what about the voting shares?
Well, he's dividing those into 6 different categories labeled A through F.
Okay, and what's the difference between them?
They have different percentages of the company's capital and different voting rights.
So some shares are more powerful than others.
Exactly, like Category A shares represent 30% of the capital, but they only get 1.33 votes per share. But Category F shares represent only 10% of the capital, but they get 3 votes per share.
Wow, so those are the super voting shares.
They are, and the other categories B, C, D, and E each represent 15% of the capital.
So it's a pretty complex system.
It seems like he's trying to make sure that certain people or groups will always have a say in how the company is run.
So who gets to nominate the board of directors?
Well, the people with Category A shares get to choose 3 board members, including the chairman.
Yeah.
And the people with Category F shares get to choose 2 board members, including the CEO.
So those 2 categories are really calling the shots.
They are, and it's pretty clear that the Giorgio Armani Foundation is going to end up with a lot of shares in either Category A or F.
So the foundation will have a big say in the future of the company.
Exactly, which makes sense since it's all about ensuring his legacy.
And what about going public? Is that still on the table?
It could be, but the new rules say that it would require a majority vote from the board, and it can't happen for at least 5 years after the new rules come into effect.
So it's not impossible, but it's not going to happen anytime soon.
Right, and when you look at all these details, it's pretty obvious that Armani wants his company to stay independent and Italian.
And he said as much in the past, right?
Yeah, he's been very vocal about not wanting to sell to one of those big French luxury conglomerates like LVMH or Kering.
He wants to keep the company in Italy where it belongs.
Exactly. He's incredibly proud of what he's built and he wants to protect it.
It's a really inspiring story.
It is. So let's wrap this up for our listeners. What are the key takeaways here?
Well, I think the biggest one is that Armani's story is all about adapting to change.
He started out wanting to be a doctor and ended up revolutionizing the fashion world.
And he did it by being really smart and strategic about his business.
He understood what people wanted and he found a way to give it to them.
And he never compromised on his vision.
He always stayed true to himself and his Italian heritage.
And he never gave up control, even when it would have been easier to sell out.
He built this incredible empire brick by brick, always keeping his eye on the long game.
It's a really impressive story.
It is. So we've covered a lot of ground today, but hopefully you've gotten a good sense of who Giorgio Armani is and how he became such a legend.
Definitely.
We've hit all the major milestones and decisions without getting too bogged down in the details.
Just the good stuff.
Exactly. So now, for the final thought-provoking question we always like to leave you with.
All right, hit me.
Given everything we've learned about Armani's careful planning and his dedication to independence, what do you think the future holds for the Armani Group after he's gone?
That's a tough one.
It is. Will his vision survive? Will the company stay Italian? Will it stay independent?
Or will it get swallowed up by one of the big luxury giants?
It's a fascinating question to think about. How do you balance legacy control and the changing landscape of the global fashion industry?
It's a real dilemma, and only time will tell what happens.
Exactly. But it's definitely a story worth following.
Absolutely.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Giorgio Armani.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time for another fascinating look at the people and ideas that are shaping our world.
See them.
Bye.
Bye.